Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm exploring an innovative solution to a common human risk challenge. We're all familiar with companies who have faced big issues in terms of misconduct. When there's a big scandal, whether that's banks engaging in bad behaviour or the diesel emissions cheating scandal in the motor industry, it's very easy to look back with hindsight and point to things that could have been spotted at the time. But wouldn't it be better for regulators, shareholders, customers and the companies themselves if we could identify those warning signs early on? That's the challenge that my guest on this episode, Dr Ruidi Shang, set to address. She's an associate professor at Tilburg University in the Netherlands and a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School. Ruidi is the co-author of some new research entitled Tone at the Bottom, Measuring Corporate Misconduct from the Text of Employee Reviews. What she and co-author Dennis Campbell set out to identify was whether it would be possible to take information that's already available about companies and determine from that which are more or less likely to have misconduct issues. To get hold of the information, they turned to an unexpected source, Glassdoor.com. Now, Glassdoor is a website that allows employees and former employees to leave anonymous reviews about what it is like to work for a particular company. It's designed primarily to help job seekers understand the realities of working in a particular place before they decide to apply or join it. So think TripAdvisor for jobs. On the face of it, this sounds a bit odd. What can a website that's designed to help job seekers tell us about the risk of misconduct? As it happens, quite a lot. Because in talking about their employee experience, people end up describing the corporate culture. Since culture is a driver of misconduct, this is potentially highly relevant. Look at enough of those reviews, and you can start to build up a pattern of what goes on in the organisation, and so form a picture of potential issues. And when I say reviews, I mean the free text that people write, not the star ratings they give the employer. What's clever about using this data set is that it recognises that asking people directly about misconduct becomes a heavily loaded question. Respondents might not choose to answer truthfully, or they might not actually recognise the fact that, say, a high-pressure environment, which they might enjoy working in, could be a driver of potential misconduct. So the best way to get a good picture is not to ask people about it at all. Rather, it's to crowdsource insights from lots of anecdotal accounts of what it's like to work within the organisation. Of course, you'll have worked out that the reason I've asked Ruidi onto the show is that it turns out that analysing the dataset on Glassdoor does have predictive capabilities. By backtesting the analysis with companies that had public scandals and exploring what was being said before the scandals emerged, the researchers discovered that these reviews can provide advanced warning of potential misconduct issues. So please enjoy my discussion with Ruidi Shang on crowdsourcing human risk insights. Ruidi, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you, Christian, for inviting me.
I'm so excited to have you here. And before we talk about your research, I wonder if you could tell my listeners a little bit about you and your area of specialism.
Of course. So now I'm assistant professor in Tilburg University in the Netherlands. I'm interested in management accounting, or more particular, how companies can design their management control systems to manage the performance and the behaviors of the employees. So I'm also interested in the misconduct that could happen in organizations. So those are my major interests. I'm also a visiting scholar in Harvard Business School. So the paper we're talking about was co-authored with Professor Dennis Campbell, who is from Harvard. So before that, I received my training, I received my PhD in the University of Melbourne. So you can see I'm traveling everywhere in the world. So that's about me and my research interests.
Amazing stuff. And I love that. What a great introduction for a podcast that talks about human risk and human decision making, because I think you're going to have some incredible insights as we go. So why don't we dive into that piece of research that you've recently published? And I saw it. And I just thought this is amazing, because one of the big challenges that people face when they're looking at managing human risk, is that sort of, well, how can I predict where it's going to happen? I know when I've had a problem, but actually I'm interested in discovering before it happens so that I can do something about it. So can you talk a little bit about the idea behind the research and what you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think you basically just summarized, the essence of the paper. So that's exactly what we were trying to do, is to identify the problem before or long before it happens. So basically, this idea starts from the 2016 Wells Fargo scandal. So if you remember that back in the end of 2016, Wells Fargo was caught, their employees create fake accounts. And that caused like a big problems for the customers, and eventually they fire like 5,000 employees. So, back then when I look at the news, I was talking to Dennis, my co-author. So, this is happening. This is bad, basically, for everyone, not just the company, but also the customer and the employees. What can we do to prevent this from happening, because employees are doing those things for years. It's not it happened yesterday, because back in 2013, 3 years before the scandal was found, there are employees, former employees report to news medias about, they received so much pressure in the organization, they were pushed to do some unethical behaviors to achieve high sales. So, this was happening in a broad way in the organization for so many years. If people could identify that, they'd be serious about that in a very earlier stage, it wouldn't have been, the consequence wouldn't have been so bad. So that's, originally how we got this idea, like why we want to do this paper. So basically what we want to do is first, we want to know what is happening inside the organization, what employees are experiencing, what they are dealing with in the daily basis. So that data is not easy to get. We can't go to every company to ask every employee about that. So we're thinking, maybe we can use some more advanced technology that are popular nowadays in the accounting research, which is, to scrape some data from the social media, so social platform. So we think about the Glassdoor website, which is, one of the biggest company review websites that employees post, their comments about their organization. So we're thinking, let's look at what employees talk about their companies there. So basically, we organize their reviews, what they write about the pros, cons, and advice of their organization, also the rating they gave to their company. So we actually identify this pattern that, certain type of words turned out to show in this kind of pattern, or more frequently for the firms that will have some kind of violation, some kind of misconduct consequence. So then we were thinking, maybe this is a way for the external users of the information, like for example investors, or maybe even the upper level managers who are not so familiar with the lower level operation of the organization and the board of the directors. So they can use those information to develop some kind of measure or pattern to find out, what is really going on in their organization. As employee facing too much pressure, or they are given up to opportunities, or they have some kind of rationalization about the undesired behaviors. So if they can identify those kind of things in a very early stage, they can hopefully take some actions to make either their investment decisions or their management control decisions about how to prevent that from happening in the future, to prevent it from being worse in the future. So that's the idea of the paper, where it comes from and what we're trying to do.
I find this really interesting because so you've basically taken a principle that says, okay, to find out what's going on in the company or the organization is we're going to tap into people that will know. But the challenge is that people won't ordinarily tell you because there's all sorts of obstacles. So if internally I report this stuff, I might feel like I'm going to lose my job. There are all sorts of challenges to doing that. So I'm not naturally going to go do that. And so what you've basically said, you've identified there's this source of data, which is people who know what's going on the ground. And in many cases, people who are themselves engaged in the activities that you're interested in. And you're saying, okay, they know all this stuff, but they're not going to tell the company in many cases. And they're probably not going to tell us, and the company won't want to say. So how do we find this stuff out? Well, the answer is we find a context in which they are prepared to disclose it. And that context, slightly counterintuitively, is a website where they talk about work to the whole world. And so Glassdoor being one of the examples, they will talk about what's going on in their organization. And so you're basically taking something that isn't designed as a whistleblowing process, designed for a completely different purpose, which is I'm going to tell you what it's like to work here. And you're basically scraping that data to get insights about what's going on in the organization. In other words, it's almost like a sort of form of hypnosis where you're saying, tell us what's really going on. You can't do that. So you found the closest proxy you can.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary, but I wanted to emphasize the difference between our research and the whistleblowing literature, because when we look at the whistleblowing literature, they're looking at, employees or, someone in the organization is telling the outsiders about the problem. The problem already happened. The problem is so severe that I feel that I need to report that. So what we're doing is different here is, for those kind of lower level or widespread misconduct, like what happened in Wells Fargo, especially in the earlier stage, employees, they experience the daily operation, they experience the management control environment that force them to engage in the misconduct behaviors, but they may not know what is the consequence. They may not know at the end it's going to be so bad. They only know, I received this very difficult sales, push me to work too hard to use any way I can. But some employees like it. So when we actually look at the reviews, the specific reviews written by some of the employees on Glassdoor, they actually say, I like the challenge. I like the fact that I can work so hard and accomplish so much and receive so much bonus. They say they like it, but they don't know, at the end, if this is the organization is using this control mechanism for such a long period and so widely, it's going to cause a negative consequence. So, some employees hate it. Some employees say it's too hard. It will be better. It is easier. But in neither case, they are identifying, this is misconduct. This is the kind of problem we, as, for example, academic would see. So lower employees, they only see the part that they can experience. In Glassdoor, they only tell you about what I experienced. They wouldn't tell you about some kind of evaluation or judgment that we as academics would normally make. So the positive thing or the advantages of this approach is twofold. So first, employees, they don't feel so subjected to some kind of cost. I'm not saying anything bad about my company. I'm just saying I think the targets are too difficult. So they are not subject to any costs on that. So they are more willing to tell about what is happening in their daily work. So that, compared to whistleblowing, allows us to get more information from more employees. And the second thing is that, usually when people start to whistleblow, that means there's already some a serious problem already happened for a while. But in this case, when employees talk about, I feel too much pressure, or I feel this control mechanism have those kind of features. They may not say it's good or bad, but if we can observe those kind of patterns in a very earlier stage before the problem happens, actually allow us to predict what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, or even in the longer future. So
that's amazing, because you're capturing things, so people are disclosing things without even realizing it, and giving you early warning indicators that would not otherwise be available. And of course, you've got them in a frame of mind where they're just telling the truth, right? So it's much easier than going around and talking to thousands or millions of people. You can just grab the data. But the second thing is the quality of that data is much higher, because they're interacting with the machine and they're doing it in a context where they don't feel somehow encumbered.
Yes, so that's actually the reason we choose Glassdoor instead of other social platforms there, because first, you're anonymous there. You're instead of for example, Twitter or Facebook, you have identity there. You're talking about, yourself, and people know yourself, even that identity sometimes is fake. So in Glassdoor, people like the reviewers are anonymous. What you post there is just a review. There's no identity. There's nothing else that's linked to it. So I think that could make people more objective, or see themselves more in this position. I am reviewing the pros cons of the company. I'm trying to give advice. So I think once you put them in this kind of context, the position or the kind of information they're going to give you would be different, would be more useful from our perspective. Yeah, and another thing we like Glassdoor is it organizes the reviews into, they have those ratings about each perspective of the organization, and then they have very structured like a box. When you fill in the reviews, they have pros, cons, advice you want to give the management, how do you perceive the outlook of the organization, do you approve of the CEO or not, like etc. etc. So those kind of structure would allow us to that first guide employees, what should I say about my company? So it structure the comments in a better way to draw out, what employees could say about their company. And for us, of course, it's much more easy, organized and easier way for us to gather those data and to analyze them. And a funny thing about the pros and the cons is when we actually compare the measure we develop from pros and cons, we find that both of them are likely to predict future misconduct. So it's not just the negative things employees talk about predicting future misconduct. It's actually the positive things they talk about can also predict future misconduct. So I think that just confirmed what we were trying to argue. Employees observe the daily practice. It may not be negative, but they could contribute to some problem in the future.
So in other words, it's almost like reading someone's body language. What you're doing there is, if you were to ask the question directly, particularly if the exercise was framed as, is this company engaging in misconduct, that you would get, in many cases, a sanitized answer. But what you've basically said here is, we found an environment where people are, without even realizing they're doing it, disclosing insights about the company that can allow us to see what's going on. And that's hence your point around, even if I'm being incredibly positive about my employer. So it's the opposite of me naturally complaining about something or pointing out flaw. I think I'm being positive about it, or that's where my reviews come out. That's helpful in itself. So you're really peering behind the curtain here, reading the body language of the organization to spot that stuff. And it's shifting that human context in which things are revealed to one where people aren't necessarily thinking in those terms. That's also part of this. Trick is the wrong word, but part of the technique.
Yeah. So basically, the argument that we're building, it's based on the management control literature. So traditionally, when we look at misconduct or fraud, we usually would attack or accuse a specific individual. Sometimes you accuse of a CEO who have accounting fraud, or like Wells Fargo, they accuse the 5,000 employees we fire they are problematic, they're unethical. So we would accuse the individual person who conduct that misconduct. But our theory about management control systems in the organization is that what lead people to conduct misconduct behaviors is actually the environment they are in. We have this theory called fraud triangle, which is basically saying in order for people to conduct undesired or fraudulent behavior, they need to have pressure or motivation to do that. They need to have opportunities to do that. They need to have some kind of rationalization in their mind to justify their behavior. So you need all the three of them. So we were arguing that the management practice, the management control environment in the organization are contributing to those three perspectives, which eventually lead to the problem. So employees, especially in the earlier stage, they observe or they experience those control features of those environment, like, oh, sales targets are too difficult, or maybe, my boss pushed me too much, those kind of things. They experience those features that would lead to those three factors, which will lead to the misconduct. So, but employees, they don't establish this link. We as academic argue there could be such a link. So, that's where we're also trying to test, if this is the case, because when we actually look at the keywords that we extract from the reviews that can be used to predict future misconduct, depends on what kind of misconduct it is. It could be something very general. They could just be talking about like their targets or their managers. But when everybody systematically talks about that, even though we don't know yet it's gonna cause problem, when everybody systematically talk some feature in a certain way, we know something is going on, and in the future it could lead to the problem. So that is the idea. We're not saying that employees know the problem and they are not willing to tell, so we are trying to detect using some technique. We basically assume in Glassdoor, when they talk about the basic features that they experience about our company, we assume they're most of them are being honest. We're just trying to establish the association between those features they're talking about with the future consequence of the organization.
And so you've identified this rich data source. Can you talk a little bit about what you do with it? So there are these reviews there. What's the process you go through to identifying what useful data would be, and then the sort of specifics of what you look for?
Yeah, so, as I just mentioned, Glassdoor have two types of data on there. They first have rating. They have like the overall rating about the firm, ranging from 1 to 5. They have specific like ratings about, for example, cultural values, senior management, career opportunities, and those kind of things. And then they also have, as I just mentioned, the three like comment boxes about pros, cons, and advice employees could give about their companies. So those are the basic data that is there. So previous literature, they mainly use the ratings, which is understandable. Those data is easy to process and it's easy to download and to analyze. But we find that if you think about you are someone that's reviewing your company in Glassdoor, you look at those ratings. Glassdoor actually didn't give you like explanation about what each rating is about. So what does senior management about? So what is like cultural values? People have different interpretation about cultural values. So we were saying, those rating is just too aggregated and maybe a little bit too noisy. So we think, we try to analyze, if the rating have any value, but it doesn't seem that the rating would have like a strong power in predicting future misconduct. So then we move to the rating reviews about the pros, cons, and advice. And so basically what we did is first, like a script, like a get those data, like about each review, like and the pros, the cons, and the advice, and then we translate them into a machine readable format, which is for each word in each of those category, we generate like a word count. So we take the assumption of like the backs of the words approach in the literature that they assume like each paragraph or each review is just a bag of the words. So each word has like a weight, which is the word count. And then after we have the word count for all the reviews, we aggregate them at the firm year level. So for each firm at each year. And then we also gather the violation data, because we can't really observe the misconduct that's going on in the organization, but we can observe the consequence of the misconduct is most of the time they were caught by the government or some kind of institutions, then they would have a record of violations. So we use this website called like violation tracker. So they are aiming to provide information about the working environment of organizations. So they provide the detailed record about the violations conducted by each organization each year and the penalties they paid for it. So but basically we have first the word count at the firm year level, and we also have the consequence, which is a violation. So then we use the machine learning technique to try to find which words tend to happen more frequently for the firm that will, for example, have violation in the next year. So this allows us to have a range of the the words that are more likely to happen for the violation firms, and each of them would have a weight, to what extent they contribute to the future violation. So then we have those words, we have their weights, we use them to develop a index. So this would be a more aggregated and simple way, to be used. Instead of looking at hundreds of words, we have one index, and then we put that index in the prediction model to see how, to what extent it can predict the future misconduct. And we find that it have a very strong influence compared to, for example, the ratings or some other firm features. And even after controlling some other firm features, such as, for example, the size of the firm or the industry of the firm or the year effect, after controlling those things that we can observe, our index still have a strong power in predicting future misconduct. So yeah, so that's what we did.
Wow. Just so that my listeners can have a sense of the sort of thing. I mean, what sort of words would indicate that what sort of things made it through onto the list, both from a positive and from a negative sense?
Yeah, so depends on the kind of violation they were committing. So I'm looking at the table 2 of the paper that we actually gave some examples of the highly weighted words in our index. So for example, they would talk about many employees would talk about just their general impressions and feelings about the organization. They would say things, it is strict, or it is discouraging or encouraging. They say it could be hostile, those things that it doesn't tell us which feature of the organization that they're experiencing, but they tell us their feeling about it. And we also have some other types of words that directly talk about the problems or the risks that they experience, such as they would use the term trouble or break or lazy or downside, those kind of words. And besides that, they were also talking about, what I said, the basic features of the management control environment that they experience in their organization. They would talk things about pay, salary. They talk about the work schedule is busy. They do overwork. They talk about there may be discrimination, or there may be some managerial kind of practice or promotion decisions. So for example, they use the words favoritism or praise or slave or something more general, just about supervise or control or promotion. So they describe the difficulty of the task, I can't do it, it's difficult, unable. So those are for the type of violations that more that more closely related to employee, the violations about for example customers, or violations about employment. But if we look at some other kind of violations, such as a criminal kind of violation, which is more rare, but the consequence is more severe. So they would talk something different. They would be more straightforward, talking about unethical, about transparency in the organization. They talk about the legal or integrity. And when they describe the firm feature, they would mention things like, layoff, or like navigate, or constraint, so collaboration. So yeah, they some of the words are more direct, I would say, directly talking about there's some problem is going on. But, there's still many words that seems more broad or more like fundamental, just like if they talk about pay or they talk about hours. But still, I think if employees, many employees systematically mention certain feature of their organization in their reviews for years, then there is a chance something is going on there, and that could cause problem.
And so the interesting thing here is obviously you can only look at companies where there's been an issue. So you need to have had a fine or a sanction or something to be able to validate the predictive capabilities.
Yeah.
But what you're basically saying is where that has happened, there is that strong correlation between those two things. In other words, put very simply, if somebody had done your analysis beforehand, you'd be able to say, well, actually, this doesn't look particularly good. We're heading in a certain direction. So I guess the interesting thing here is if I were a firm saying this is fascinating, how do I know what to search against? Because I haven't yet got, I haven't got the results. So from predictive capability, I guess what I do is I look and see whether other people in a similar space take the relevant words for them and say, well, how does that apply to me? Is that how you look at it for people where you don't have that data?
Yeah, I mean, for of course, we are this results or this finding can be used in different ways. For outsiders like academics or investors, they can use that index to predict what could happen in the future. But for companies who don't know, what may happen in the future, they just want to know, okay, how well I perform. Is there any problems? There, I think there are two potential ways they can use it. So first is to use our index, even though you don't know whether or what kind of violation that may happen to your company in, 3 years later, but still you can use this index to check if this index is very high and this index is linked to some kind of the type of violations we identified in our research. Then you may need to be careful, there may be some problem, something like that could happen in the future. Then I think like managers need to be aware, maybe they need to revisit what is happening in the organization to see if they need to do anything. I think that's the most direct way they can use our study. And the second, the more indirect way is I think this provide people with the idea that it's when something happened, when the misconduct or the undesired consequence happens, it's not, as I just mentioned, a fault of one particular person who is responsible for that. It's the environment is having a problem. So I think it just reminds managers in the organization to regularly, gather data or gather information from the lower level employees, about how they feel or about what's going on in the organization, and to identify, if there is any chance that could cause a problem. So in that case, I think this implication is more general. It's not necessarily means every manager or every company needed to use our index and the Glassdoor data, but I think that every company could be aware of that if there is a problem, it's very likely to be caused, especially if it's a widespread problem in the entire organization. It's likely that it's not a problem of one or some employees. It could be something wrong in this broader environment that managers should be aware that they need to check and evaluate and think about that environment carefully, like on a regular basis. So, and even though they don't use Glassdoor data, they could still, develop some kind of channel to communicate to the employees, to gather, employees' experience about the company. And they don't need to wait until employees report something so bad is going on. When employees they systematically talk about some feature, then, maybe managers need to look at that feature. So, yeah.
And does the signal get stronger the closer you get to the piece. So in other words, you start to see more use of these terms the closer you get to a problem. Is there anything along those lines that sort of becomes helpful in terms of seeing how close to the edge the company is?
Yes, that's very interesting. So, in the paper, we have the we have Glassdoor as an example. So, the scandal was like happening at the end of 2016, and we find that this like our measure, our index started to increase and peak around 2012 and 2013, and after that, it actually started to decline. So because I think there is a lag between the final like violation and the problem itself. When the problem was found and eventually the violation happened and the government started to do something, there is a lag usually like a year or so. So I would say it happens like 2 or 3 years, normally like 3 years before the violation happens. So we also, like in the online appendix, we did like a like more aggregated analysis for all those like serial violators, like those firms that conduct violations like more than once. So we also find it started to increase about like 2 or 3 years before they become serial violator, and then it actually started to decline when the violation actually happened. So that would be a range of time that we predict using our measures.
So in other words, it suggests this is an early warning system.
Yeah.
And that you can really use people within your organization, albeit in this different context, as radars for things that are going on, and therefore potentially, to your overall point here, make determinations about things that are happening before they get to a serious state. So you've identified there's a pattern of behavior here. Of course, as you point out, we have that lag between regulatory fines being announced. So the big thing, the data point that you've got in public, the clear delay between the thing happening. But even the timescales you're talking about here, it does suggest that there is this isn't just sort of a useful thing to look at with hindsight and say, could we have spotted it? Genuinely, there seems to be a correlation that actually, had somebody undertaken this exercise in that way, that would have provided an early warning, or at least something to investigate alongside the other processes that you would normally go through.
Yes, because when we look at whistleblowing, or when we look at like any kind of investigation of the violation, when they go backward, they would put the company or a person, in or a group of people in the center. They try to understand, what they did and why they did that, how they did that. Everything is centered around the person who committed the problem. So, but I think we're taking like a different approach. We're not putting any person in the middle. We're putting the environment that could lead to the problem like in the middle. So here we're not saying anyone in the company is evil or is responsible. We're just saying everybody is exposed or is subject to the environment. So we're focusing on the environmental factors in this case. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. When things go wrong in companies, the lens is always, whose fault is this? Yeah. And we start to look at it through, yes, human beings crystallize these things because they do things or don't do things, but that's always the lens. And I always have a simple thing that says, look, if you've got 1 or 2 people breaching a policy, then you've probably got a people problem because everybody else seems to manage to comply. If you have hundreds of people breaching a policy, you have a policy problem. Yes. Because you don't have hundreds of people that are setting out to commit crimes. Yes. And so I think that's a really helpful way of shifting that debate. And I guess you have to, because it's anonymous. So even if you wanted to dig into who is this person, you can't do that. And so you're aggregating that up into it's crowdsourcing and identifying dynamics that apply to lots of people. And therefore, because they apply to lots of people, this is an environmental or a cultural problem.
Yes.
And you are fundamentally shifting that lens away from the individual onto that broader piece.
Yes. So, of course, for the reason of justice, of course, we need to decide and penalize who we think is responsible for that. But if we are in the angle of managing the company, how to make the company work better, then I guess who is responsible is less important. Well, what's more important here is how we can create an environment that problems are less likely to happen, or even it happen in earlier stage, we can identify and do something to prevent it from getting worse. So that is the case. In the study, we do not oriented to identify or that's why we use this approach that let the data speak for itself. So we didn't specify any particular words we want to identify. We don't try to look for certain type of reviews written by certain type of people. Instead, we use all the data we have and let the data speak for itself. See what kind of words or patterns could indicate like earlier stage problem in the environment. So that is a basic idea of this paper. Yeah.
And I was thinking as you were talking, I mean, Glassdoor was not set up as a risk management tool.
Yeah, exactly.
It's set up as a tool that is, loosely defined to help people decide where they want to work. And you can you get some honest reviews about places that you might be considering to work. And what you've done is taken that and said, we can repurpose this as a forward-looking risk indicator. So I find that fascinating because it's just a different, the data's collected with one lens, but you're looking at it through a slightly different one, but it still serves a purpose. Is this something you've spoken to Glassdoor about? Are they interested in this? Because I would have thought this is a tremendous opportunity for them.
Yeah, we haven't, because the paper just recently got fully accepted. So we were busy revising the paper. We haven't informed Glassdoor about that. Maybe, we should do that soon. But I guess, you're hitting the point. The good thing about Glassdoor, the reason it can be used as a good tool to analyze forward-looking misconduct is because it's not oriented to misconduct. So it's not about misconduct or anything like that, like risk or ethical behaviors. It's not about any of those at all. It's basically tell you something very brief and broad. Tell us something about your organization's pros, cons, and advice you want to give to the management. So I think this would fit our goal of analyzing the operating environment, like the control environment in the earlier stage, to see if there is any systematic patterns that people keep bringing up. So that's an important reason we pick Glassdoor instead of some other kind of information source, that Glassdoor is actually not oriented towards misconduct.
And so logically from there, you would be saying, and I recognize we're into the realms of hypotheticals, but you'd basically be saying, actually, if you were to start shifting and deliberately asking questions about this, in other words, you moved away from that lens of tell us what this place is like to work in. Actually, that feels logical because but actually from a data quality perspective, almost what you're saying is that would potentially be destructive.
That's definitely the case. If you ask an employee, if you have another comment box on Glassdoor saying, tell us about the potential misconduct and ethical behavior in your organization, they probably wouldn't want to say anything. They probably wouldn't even, some people would probably even not use the Glassdoor as information like platform for themselves. And another thing is a company may start to take actions. They may give pressure to their employee or even to Glassdoor. Take down that comment, that's not true. Or they may coordinate with the employee. You guys all come to write a good review about us. It would give people incentives. So different types of incentives. So in that case, you actually you're totally right. That would actually hurt the quality of the data, and that also logically that's also not fit our theory really well, because as I mentioned, the theory is that the earlier stage, or just the daily practice and the control practices, it could lead to some kind of factors that contribute to misconduct, but employees may not know that. So even logically, you ask them to write about it. Some employees, for example, they observe the difficult sales target in the earlier stage, but they may not identify that as a risk. So I think even logically, that is not like a very good approach to ask them more directly about that.
Glassdoor obviously it's self-selecting in the sense that not every single person's on it, and people need to have a reason to go on it. But what I guess is interesting is the way you're talking about it is that in many respects it doesn't matter, because what you're doing is looking in aggregate across the piece at everything that's there, and you're looking at both positive and negative sentiment views for the company. And so for those reasons, you would say, I presume, well, actually, it doesn't matter this is a small subset of people, because what they're identifying is things that's happening. If there are enough of them that are identifying it, there is something there. And even if this is a very small pocket, so even if it's 10% of the company, and the other 90% doesn't have any views whatsoever, doesn't care, doesn't see any of these things. Imagine this is a very unique set of circumstances. You would say that doesn't matter, because misconduct, small things can blow up. So if it's happening anywhere in your organization, it's a problem. And so even if it's a very, very small data set relative to the entire population, that's not necessarily a bug. That's just a feature.
Yeah, so that's actually another reason we use the systematic, like our index are identifying the systematic words. The words systematically happen for firms that will have violations in the future. We're not looking for the comments or the words that are most express that that are most severe, that are most obvious. We're looking at the most systematic words, not the most obvious or most intuitive words about misconduct. So I guess even you only have 10% or even 5% of the company are systematically, we're all talking about the same feature of the organization. For example, targets are so high, that tells us something, So that tells us, this feature may be like widespread in the organization that we need to be careful about. So that's, the first point is looking at the most systematic words instead of the most intuitive words. And the second thing about who are actually using Glassdoor, we actually receive a lot of comments and questions about that in the review process for this paper. So people would have different impressions. Some would think, oh, you use Glassdoor because you want to find a new job. So you left your previous company, means you must hate it. So you will be more negative about it. Or some people will say, oh, maybe they would be less positive because at the end of the day, it's still a public platform. You don't want to be, too aggressive. So, people have different understanding or assumptions about who are using Glassdoor and what other kind of incentives, personal incentives they may have, when they are writing their comments. But based on my personal observation of the data, users they use Glassdoor for all kinds of reasons. It's some people used to work in a company and they're looking for a new job through Glassdoor. That means they need to first give a review, and the Glassdoor allow them to use other function of the website. So, but it does not necessarily mean the person hates a company. You left a company for many reasons. It's not necessarily something negative about the company, but Glassdoor at the same time also provide other information, like, for example, the average wage of a certain area or certain industry, or they have data or information about job interviews, or job postings and all kinds of information there. So it's not necessarily that person is looking for a new job. They could just be curious about their wage or some other things happening in the industry. So I just feel we can't jump directly into some kind of impression or judgment about people using Glassdoor or hate their company, or maybe they're not like negative enough. So I think that perspective definitely require some more investigation on who is exactly using, what kinds of people are actually using Glassdoor, and what kind of motivation they are having there. Although I think it's difficult because it's anonymous. But for this paper, it's not that relevant, because basically no matter who is using Glassdoor, eventually we just want to see if we can use the data there to build an index that help, outsiders or even the managers of the organization to check, whether there is a higher risk in the organization. So as long as the data can develop the measure to serve that function, it doesn't matter, who are using, like what exactly type of people are using Glassdoor. So yeah.
And the thing I think is fascinating is when we tend to think of review sites, that we focus on, particularly if you're a restaurant business and you're focusing on a review site, you'd be looking at it saying, what are they saying about my food? What was the experience like? And I take personally, anybody that criticizes it is a potential risk to me, because actually, that might put other customers off. And so I care about whether I've got a 5-star rating on TripAdvisor or a 1-star rating. But all of those sort of factors don't really come into play for this, because you're saying even if people are motivated for the wrong reasons to do things, right? I've got to put a review to get onto Glassdoor, so I'll just write something, and I'm trying to get away from my current employer because I hate them. I'll write things down. You would say, well, actually, this is still useful data, because actually, if one person identifies one thing, that's useful. If lots of people identify it from a risk perspective, you really want to know about it. So the only danger here is that there's a load of stuff that's made up, i.e. the data is complete nonsense and people are making things up. But you'd have to have a lot of people doing that.
Yes.
And of course, you're not, unlike the positive sense of reviews as in the restaurant one, this isn't the only tool. This isn't the be all and end all. This is just one of the things that you add to your risk management toolkit. So it's an indicator that says, here is something you might want to take a look at, because the suggestion is there's a problem here.
Yeah.
If you look into it and discover something, that shouldn't be the sole driver for your risk management program. It's just a pretty strong indicator. So I think that the sort of almost the quality of the data point seems to me falls away slightly, because you're not saying run your whole business off the back of this.
Yes.
You're just saying here's something useful.
Yes.
And if you investigate it, turns out it's a whole load of disgruntled ex-employees. Well, I'll tell you what, if you've got hundreds of disgruntled ex-employees, that's a useful piece of data in itself. So for me, that kind of falls away. But I think that comes from, we don't think about the data set in the way that you're looking at it, right? Which is why the fixation of let's give it a star rating, right, is useless, as you say, for these purposes. And that's why if we move away from the data into the anecdata, it's much more powerful. So I think it's really interesting when people challenge you on this basis, because you're neatly sidestepping that, not because you're being cunning, but because what you've identified is a slightly counterintuitive approach to things, which requires people to think counterintuitively about the data they're getting. And so the normal criticisms, I think, wouldn't apply.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the foundation or the essence of like the paper is we put the environment in the middle, as I said, in both the theory and the way we analyze the data. Say if some employee, they hate their company for some reason, they gave the very low rating, for like all the ratings on Glassdoor, they gave very low rating, and they say something, I hate the company, they're bad, they're rude, they say those things. But if this is not systematically mentioned, by another hundreds of employees that post their reviews, then this part of the information doesn't matter. And because also we're not looking at the rating, so the measure is not biased by that. It's just our word indexes will not incorporate that piece of the information that is not systematic. So that is how we put the environment in the center of the story, which is we have the most systematic description about the firm that tells us about the environment there. So
Wow, I could keep talking about this when we're running out of time, so I want to make sure I catch it. So you've clearly, this has just been published. So I know it's early days in terms of reactions, but what's the next stage of this? Are you taking this further? Are you thinking about partnering with people? Where does this go to?
So for this particular paper, I think this paper received some attention from the public.
You got mine, that's for sure.
Yes, I think we probably write a Harvard Business Review article about that. We haven't really started, but that's a plan. So hopefully we can write something, and Harvard Business Review is willing to accept it. So that's the plan for the next step. About this paper, and Dennis and I also working on other papers using Glassdoor data, not in this way, like not identify misconduct, but we use that as a measure for the corporate culture, because, for example, all the employees, if they systematically talk about some kind of topic, if they reviews that they have like some homogeneity in the topics they mention, it means there is a strong belief, there is something that everybody experience, some kind of norms or beliefs that's strongly held within the organization. So that can be used as a measure for strong culture. Whereas you compared to the other companies where different employees talk about different things, there's like no like homogeneity in the kind of topic they talk about. That means there's no strong like norms or beliefs in those companies, so that will be identified as a weak culture. So we're looking at if that is related to for example, how they compensate their managers. If you have a strong culture, you would think the company's performance characteristics would be different, and that's how that's related to the company's growth. If I recruit too many employees, all of a sudden I grow really fast, would that hurt my culture? So those are something we're going to do in the next, not directly about this topic, but still the same kind of data, the similar kind of idea that we use the data. So that's, yeah.
My mind is now racing because you've just opened up a whole load of things. And I think this is a really fantastic example of thinking incredibly innovatively to solve, I think, as I said at the outset, what is a blindingly obvious problem, which is we don't want bad things to be happening. But how do we even start to measure what's going on? And I think what's great is you've identified a unique way of looking at it. And I think as we've been exploring it, it sort of seems to me that actually it comes with a tremendous, sure, we can criticize and say it's not perfect, but no source is. But I think it comes with a tremendous amount of things that are incredibly positive and that you wouldn't get from other sources. And so I love it because I think it's innovative. I think it's fun. I think it's slightly subversive in the sense it's disrupting what Glassdoor is about. So I love the idea of a tech company that's come in to disrupt something and to be challenging itself, having its business model challenged. That wasn't your aim, but I think it's done that. And look, you clearly speak with this, with a tremendous amount of passion for what you do, and that comes through as well. So thank you so much, firstly, for doing the research, because it's blown my mind, which is a great thing. But secondly, for being such an amazing guest on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, I always, feel like I really appreciate that. I'm very excited that my research work get more interest from like the public, the broader audience, because when you're doing a paper, it takes many years. This idea originates from 2016 when the Wells Fargo scandal happened, but until now, we really spent many years in exploring the data and developing the measures. So and that procedure has always been a little bit lonely, but it's great to see that it has been paid off, so that it is really attracting attention. As you mentioned, we acknowledge it's not perfect. There's no research that is perfect. The data has its limitation, and our method, of course, has its limitation. But I hope at least we open this new path, or open this way of thinking for people to think risk and misconduct from a more of the perspective of the environment instead of the individuals who commit the problem, because I think that's more valuable for managers and of course academics in terms of how to manage the environment and how to manage their organization to prevent those risks from materialize. So yeah.
Yes to all of that. I absolutely love it. I will put a link to the research and to your website in the show notes so people can read that and find you. Please stay in touch as you do more of this, because I'm absolutely convinced you're going to find some really interesting stuff. I would love, when you get to that point, I would love to have you back on the show, but it's been an absolute supreme pleasure. I am going to shine a light on this research. I'm going to talk to people about it because I think this is something that every single company should be doing. So I'm going to shout loudly about it. Thank you so much for coming and telling us all about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a really, great pleasure to have this conversation. And I hope it'll be useful, and I hope it'll be interesting to the audience.
No question. Thank you. So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Ruidi for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about her work and to read the research tone at the bottom, measuring corporate misconduct from the text of employee reviews, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To find out more about human risk, the work that I do with my clients, the Human Risk newsletter, blog and video blog, visit human-risk.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe, remember to crowdsource your insights, and thanks for listening.